How's it going, everybody? It's been a little while. I've been just really busy with a lot of things going on and just haven't really had time to do a lot of recording. I do have a match recording for the Warrior of Light challenge that will be going up very, very shortly. It's actually going to be the last one in that series, for better or worse, but that doesn't mean that that's going to necessarily change. We can talk about that later on. But wanted to go through and talk a little bit more about the set. So if you haven't seen it, I did a full set review on Travis's channel. Just go to Rudros, and you'll see the last or the three set review videos. Those all have me in them. But something I've always enjoyed, and actually he hasn't done one for this set yet, which is funny because he's done it the last three, is Steve D would do a vibe check where he would just take the legends and just kind of order them. And like, from like what he thought was the best legend to what he thought was the worst. And it's a pretty easy starting point to just kind of take all the legends in a set, throw them all in a group, and then figure out what we like so far and what we don't like. So I'm going to start these from what I think is the worst legend of the set and try to kind of put them in order from worst to best. And for better or worse, I think the worst legend of the set is Citra. I really just don't see what deck wants this effect. I know that like people when the card was spoiled or revealed, you're like, oh, well, you can play it in mono wind. And what mono wind deck can possibly function in this current format without Shinryu? Like, yes, it's nice to not have to play Shinryu and to have the ability to play other cards. And Citra is a 3 CP card that would represent 2 casts by itself. Makes your Dryad a little bit worse, but I mean, it also sort of draws you the same card that Dryad would anyway. Like, the effect is generally good. I just don't like going through all the mono elements. You're not playing in a mono water because it conflicts too much with Lena. And I don't know what 3 CP summon you're playing. I guess like Leviathan, but like 3 CP draw 2, put 1 on top or bottom of your deck isn't that powerful. Maybe like a mono Earth Shell where like we can say, well, I'm in mono Earth, so I don't need Shinryu. Maybe you're like, well, I can Shan Toto and do all this other stuff, and maybe getting perpetual access to Mist Dragon is that useful. I guess I could see it. But again, like, is that enough for this card? Mono Lightning, maybe you could get like the Odin that like draws you a card, so she could be like 3 CP, kill something small, and draw a card. And Mono Lightning's already kind of self-milling itself these days anyway, but I don't know, that just seems like a lot of work for a light or dark card to function when you can just run Shinryu, and Shinryu can just get the summon you wanted to cast anyway, right? Like, there are games playing Mono Wind even where you get Shinryu and don't go for the Shinryu special because it's not the right thing to do for the game state. I just feel like Citra just kind of does the one thing, and while she does it pretty decently, there's just not a reason to play her over other cards. So she's fine. I think she kind of falls to me in like the same tier of light and dark cards as like Bart's or 2 CP Warrior of Light. Is like cards with good generic effects I just don't see play because the light dark card has to be game winningly powerful for me to want to put it in my deck nowadays. For my second lowest rated legend of the set, I'm going to put Gilgamesh in. And I think Gilgamesh just is too expensive. I think that costing 3 for 7 is fine. I think being able to pay a kicker to kill something on entry and attack is great. But Double Earth just absolutely kills this card for me. It's so difficult. Uh, like comparing this to something like Roble, if we say a crystal costs about a CP and a half, Roble cost 4, does this, and instead of taxing you further over the course of the game, Roble draws you cards. I know that like Gilgamesh technically gets protection once you get like more backups, but like, is that really worth it? And then like the clear pairing is, well, you play it with Enkidu, but Enkidu only helps the first tax effect go off, and then you still need 2 backups that can pay for Earth. And you need to be on 5 backups. And when you're on 5 backups, killing one thing, that late in the game isn't nearly as good as, you could pay for Titan and wipe the board, right? Or if you want to break one specific thing, you could play Garuda if you have access to Lightning CP, or even something like draft fodder like Graph. It reminds me way too much of Zondi, which is a card from last set that I just really never gelled with. And I think Enkidu the Gilgamesh and Enkidu combo just feels the exact same. And sure, you could run 3 Gilgamesh, 1 Enkidu, get the Enkidu in the break zone, but then like if your opponent misdragons you, and everybody's on 3 misdragon these days, that combo's offline, so now you're just left with a really bad removal spell. Like paying 6 to kill one thing. I don't want to do that ever when I can just play even like Noctis and stuff. Just I don't know. I feel like I would like it better if it was like 1 Earth, 1 generic CP. And then maybe Enkidu like is a 2 CP 5k that untaps 2 on entry. I think the combo would just be a little bit better, but like as is, I'm just really every time I see this card. We even laughed one time I was playing it in draft, and my we drafted. My friend played this, and they broke like whatever random thing I had in my field, and then I Lilith special it back and it dies, and we laughed at like I put a 2 CP forward out that did the exact same thing for 2 extra CP that he did for 6 CP. So I'm not really vibing with Gilgamesh at all. I think the card just is not particularly strong. I think that's the next one on the list. I'm gonna put it's Dorgan. And again, Dorgan's another card that reminds me a little bit of Citra and a little bit of Gilgamesh, and that like nothing on the card is bad. I've seen him even show up in a couple of like mid-rangey wind lists as just like a generic good stuff catch-all card. 4 CP draw card isn't really where you want to be, but like you'll take it. But I've been trying to run this guy in mono win lately, saying, well, maybe this can go in over a copy of Alexander. And every time I played this card, I wished it was Alexander instead. Sure, he does let you, generically draw a card. You get a little bit of break zone hate, which can be really big. You can get like both Lusos out of your opponent's break zone if they had to search them early. You can get 4 CP Warrior of Lights out of the break zone to turn off, like Gilgamesh FFBE. But I don't want to pay 4 to remove 2 things from the break zone. And if I do, I'm just going to play Edge. So then the other modes have to start making up for it. And, like, neither of them is strictly better than Alexander, especially for the cost. So you're just left with this card. Then you say, well, it also lets you draw a card generically. 4 CP, draw a card, kill something that's really good too. But we have cards like Cerberus, and Cerberus is either activate your backups if that's what you need, or draw a card if you're trying to storm off and get to a Luso turn. That's just generically better than this, whatever Dorgan's trying to do. So I think the card is okay. I don't think that it's like problematic if you're playing it. I just don't think he's ever going to be best in slot in any win, cast focus decks. And I don't think that like the effect is so powerful if you get just one of them that it's worth as just a generic good stuff wind card over a lot of the other options. All right, up next. I think that's the only cards that I would put in D tier as cards that like they're fine, but if they were rares or heroes, I don't think I would like really bat an eye. I think Reagan is probably next on my list. I'm not particularly high on Reagan as a card, but I do at least see a couple of use cases for it. I think that getting 2 forwards on the field for 6 CP can be pretty valuable. Unlike Citra, you really only need to run the 1 copy of Warrior of Light in your break zone, and then 4 cards is easier to remove than 5. I think the tutor range for him is a little bit more valuable between stuff like the promo Zac, cards like Gilgamesh FFBE, cards like Cypher. There's just more that I would get with Reagan than I would with Citra. And I think his other effect is just better too. I don't think the card is amazing. I think that a lot of what he does, you could run like 1 CP Fury in last set, which is a card that I said was like sleeper really good, just didn't see a lot of play. And Reagan's kind of like Furion's kind of like a build your own Reagan at that point. But there's enough of a use case. This guy will probably rotate into a meta deck at some point. The effect to just get the right forward at the right time just can be game interminatively powerful. The next legend that I want to talk about, I think, is Ace. And I think Ace has generally been about what I expected of Ace. I definitely have seen a couple of sides. I've been playing, a fair bit of Mono Wind this set, just because I don't know why. I always feel like Mono Wind is one of those archetypes that I want to learn and be better at than I am. But so much time playing Earthwind has just kind of like messed with my brain, and I just can't get great at Mono Wind. But playing it, I've had him come in and do 12k cleave and just say, your opponent's board is wiped. But when I did that, that was my turn. Was wipe my opponent's board, which is good. And it's a one-sided board wipe. I'm not having to draw him, which is great. If I had to draw him, I definitely wouldn't be playing him. But I do oftentimes feel that, like, ditching the 2 cards in hand to play this doesn't feel amazing. It really does kind of feel like I'm giving up a lot of powerful plays when I'm giving up 2 really good mono win cards in hand to play this card. And a lot of times when I'm looking to play him early to try to stabilize against aggro, getting to the right numbers, especially if my opponent has removal form on entry, can be a little bit tricky. The most common thing is like, well, you can get to like 4 backups plus like a Tomos or Evray, and that's going to guarantee a 5k cleave, which is, not bad. Killing a bunch of weenies and, establishing an 8k that can maybe draw you a card or 2 is not, bad at all when you have access to it on demand. But in general, I've been kind of just going for him as like the late game finisher payload, because like you can end up in mono win in situations, at least in my experience, again, especially in control mirrors, where you can lose so over and over again, but you draw and burn so many cards in your deck that you end up getting closer deck out. And Ace just kind of says, I'm not drawing cards, I'm not going to cast a bunch of things, I want to push damage this turn, so I don't want to bounce my Luso and my Lulus and all that. I'm just going to slam this guy, cleave the field, and then swing in with all my little weenies for game. And he's very effective in that role. But I think unlike the other LB Legends, I think he's worse in that role than they are. So I think C is, he's good, he does what he does, what he says on the tin, and not a lot more. Alright, what do I want to go for my next one? I'm going to go with Sephiroth as the bottom of B. I really haven't had a ton of use for this card, and I've seen him be, like, okay. But I do think the use cases for this card are good enough where he should be in a majority of decks right now. I think it's a little bit expensive to use both modes, but I was explaining to a friend, both modes really don't, it says like, oh, you're paying 6 for this. Like, no, you sort of like, if you use it on your opponent's turn and then you cast him on yours, he kind of draws you a card in there. So it's really like 5 CP, break a dull forward, your opponent discards a card. I think there's a lot of use cases with like instant speed recovery cards like Kusith that like can get him back and kind of do things out of nowhere. I think he's fantastic in Gigawall because he's a summon that like also isn't a whiff for Gigawall, which is really, really powerful. I think the ability to say like, well, the ceiling on this card is that it's a removal summon when I need it, and when it's not a removal summon, it's a hit for Gigawall is really good. It's why a lot of times I was experimenting with Prish, and Gigawall was the same thing. This is just better than Prish in that role. But I do understand a lot of people being underwhelmed because it really is just kind of like a summon that can turn into a body with a kicker cost. Up next, I think I'm going to go with Kurasame. Kurasame is really good, but I don't think Ice by itself has the tools to really make Kurasame great. So you end up in this awkward situation where, like, Shinryu sort of helps a little bit, but, like, doesn't feel amazing. The Mono Ice 13 deck can't play Shinryu, and probably wouldn't play this because it's not intending to curve to 5 backups consistently anyway. Emina is a great support card to, like, try to turn him online, but, like, you really, really want that Earth when you're playing these, like, discard control decks. And then there's a bit of a nombo with them, even, in a way, where, like, because you want to get the maximum value out of the discard, you kind of want to ramp quickly, play defense, and then make them discard 5 all at once. But, like, if you're actively doing what Ice is doing, sometimes you're just incidentally making your opponent discard when you, like, play a Rufus or something. And in that case, you're getting a lot less value out of Kurasame. I do think the card is really good. I think it's really obnoxious. I still don't like that the card was printed, to be like quite honest. I don't think this card should exist. But I also just think the card is only okay at the end of the day. Up next in B tier, let's go with Selfie. I think Selfie and the next card are really close. Selfie is boring but good. She does a ton of damage. I really don't. Again, it's an annoying set for me because I haven't really enjoyed some of these legends. You know, Kosame is a card that just enables a gameplay style that I don't really enjoy. The control payload is Gilgamesh, who is just so overcosted for what he is. Same for, like, you know, Dorgan seems like he's really expensive. And then we get cards like Selfie, which just say, do your point, put in a point of damage, and search the best card in your deck for follow-up. She's not exciting. I think she's actually, being in fire hurts a lot for this card, because I think you really have to, like, play her off of a Squall most of the time. Yes, Sid Kramer can play her if you're in Lightning, but like, or not Sid, is it Sid Kramer? Whatever the Sid, the FF8 Sid is, like color fixes for 8 stuff. But that card has been okay, but I've never liked relying on it. It's kind of one of those things where it's like, to me, I would treat it as like a bonus. You know, maybe like you're playing light, you've only got Lightning backups out, but you want to cast a Squall, and like, oh, I've got a Kramer, a Sid, I don't need to worry about that. Is this Sid? Okay, now it's driving me nuts. Boop, boop. Sid Kramer. I was right. Okay. I just don't like relying on Sid Kramer to color fix, which basically means that she only comes in off of Squall, which sort of makes Squall the legend instead of her. Then again, she just enables that, like, Unga Boonga, throw 3 forwards on turn 1 and answer me or die in 2 turns, you know, gameplay style that I just don't find engaging. There's just nothing else she can do. Lastly, I'm going to put Ultimecia in B tier. I do think 15 is a little tricky to get to in some games. And yes, very clearly stuff like Don Corneo turns this on instantly. But I do also kind of look at this card as a card that doesn't do anything until late. And Lightning does have recursion. You know, cards like Axis work fantastic with her. But a lot of other cards that you might want, like Menaging, for example, can't get back her. I think there's enough support between like Cypher and Axis to enable running to Ultimecia and pulling back the one when you really want her. But I do kind of wonder how differently she could have played if maybe she was a 2CP 5k that became a 5CP 9k when you have 15 cards in your break zone. And then when you have that, you can pay a 3CP kicker to steal an opponent's forward, right? I think that would have been a more elegant design. And maybe, like, they don't want to have a special on a 2CP forward that, like, says reduce something's power by 10k. I don't know. Maybe that wouldn't be broken in my opinion, but, like, I could see an argument for that. And I think it would be hard to template it where it's... I guess you could just say, like, you can only use this special if you have 15 cards in your break zone. But I do think that, like, she does so little for so long. And the first effect is kind of like Lena in that it entirely exists to prevent the ability from being fizzled by Mist Dragon in hand. And that's just not where I really want to be with a card like this, right? So... she's really, really strong. The amount of times I've stolen, like, Warriors of Light, I've seen Porums taken with it, I've seen just, you know, everything under the sun. But she is a card that's conditional on timing, and because of that, I really do think that B is about the right place for her. Alright, time to move on to A. I think Tidus is the bottom of A. I think Tidus is just generic squint and you see it to be here. I think that, like, of the Legend Limit Breaks, it's the one that you can probably play in the most decks. I do really like the design behind the card, trying to avoid, making Blue Worm more broken than it already is. Making you have to kind of cash your Blue Worms in if you want to use them the turn Tidus comes into play. I like that it is generic enough to see play in non-mono water decks. But I also have seen it where this card really comes up a lot less than I thought he would. I think the card just existing is great. I think that if you can save limit breaks for him and you're not, just casting Clouds and Victorias left and right, it's a pretty good argument that you can cast this Tidus at some point over the course of the game. But he is hard enough to get online because usually you have to untap with the 7 characters, non-monster characters. Because I think that if you have to play one and then go into him, he's a lot harder to enable, which is probably why Yuna was printed now that I think about it. It's just a way of making this easier to come online. Yuna kind of gives you the body, refunds you the CP so that the specials, the entry effect is easier to pay for and really enables that. So I do like the card, but it hasn't been the access code talker that I thought it was. And I think for that reason, it's going to stay in A. Up next... Noct. Noct is really good. I think that the fears of Noct getting canceled by Amaterasu are pretty well founded. But I also don't think it's the end of the world. If you do that, say you play a backup, and then you play Noct, you discard 4 cards to hand size, but if you're putting Amaterasu's, they're not Amaterasuing you off of a backup usually. So they're pitching 2 cards from hand, and they're also pitching the Amaterasu. So they're pitching 6 CP to your 8 at that point. And Noct still can get value that turn if you can hold a Warrior of Darkness in hand when you do that. I think it creates a must-kill target. I think the Warrior of Darkness engine is just very good. I think it's very self-contained, and it goes in a lot of different decks. The fact that Noct likes having Earth CP, but doesn't really need it for anything other than the special, means that you can kind of just jam 12 Warriors of Darkness or 13 Warriors of Darkness in any deck in the same way that I used to just kind of throw Scions in any deck that just would make Lightning CP. I think there's a higher cost to playing Noct because it means that when you draw Noct, for him to be good, you just have to be willing to pitch the cards in your hand. But that's not always a downside. And I also think that because Noct gets so many cards out of your deck, he ends up doing something really interesting to it, which is he gets... When you resolve a Noct, you pull 3 Warriors of Darkness. It's kind of like you only had... you had fewer cards in your deck to begin with. So your top decks late game are going to be a lot more filled with live draws if your draws for late game are intended well enough. And I don't know, maybe you're playing an Earth late game or whatever the case may be. I think he enables that very, very well. So I really like the card. I really like the engine. I'm not sure what the best home for him is, but this is the one card this set that feels like he can enable a control game plan or a mid-range game plan. And for that, this is very much the Ghoul type of card of the set, I think, as the cards that I really, really like see getting printed. Even if he is kind of I would get laughed out of a room for designing this card, I think. I do have one more A, and I'm going to put Corilla here. And this might be too low. She might be bottom of S. So at the Winter Cup, I was talking with Tori Kelly, and Tori Kelly said that he thought if Warrior of Light could only play forwards, the card would be less problematic. And Corilla is here to say that actually that logic just is not correct. Corilla plays worse targets than Warrior of Light. And really never plays backups. I've never seen anybody play Earth Water with Corilla and try to spike Bilo or whatever the old WAF Earth Knights are. This card right now is mostly being played to just try to spike 3 forwards on turn 1 or 2 and just kill the opponent into the sun before the game goes late. And it's Renoa flickerable, and the forwards it gets in particular. Laswell's a card that just should never have fallen out of favor. I don't care what people say about oh, it dies to Brynhildr. It's no, the card demanded a response at all times. And this is a card that just enables Laswell in ways that he never dreamed. And even little stuff, honestly. The first time I played this, or saw this played, I was playing against, I gave my deck list to Travis, who was running it into me. And stuff like Hecaton Shear just doesn't work against this deck because of Corilla. She protects the other knights from even taking the damage from it, which makes stuff like even Luso becomes harder to resolve against it. It's stompy, it's aggro, it does one thing and one thing only, but it does it very well. And if you enjoy this type of deck, that's great. I don't have anything against it, but I don't know. Stop printing cards like this. Or, give me a reason to play this in a mid-range deck. Let it play 4 CP, but one must be a forward and one must be a backup, right? There were ways of designing Corilla in a way that, didn't involve Unga Boonga, I play my forward, here's 3 more forwards, you die in 2 turns. And again, Corilla just does it better than any of the other legends in the set, and probably as well as any card not named Warrior of Light. And unlike Warrior of Light, I think there's room to play in Warriors of Light, or not Warriors of Light, Warrior of Light, Gigawall. Gigawall has control elements to it. It's not... People say, Gigawall is an aggro deck. Gigawall is an aggro deck. And I don't think Gigawall is an aggro deck. I think it's a tempo mid-range deck at its core that can play aggro. Corilla just isn't being played in that way at all. It's a Knights deck that isn't playing Ovelia or 5 CP Agrius right now. And I just... It kind of sucks. I always used to say that Knights were 1 card off of being a playable tribe. Corilla proves that I was right. I just don't really like the direction in which I was correct, unfortunately. So we have our S tiers now. Montleonis, and I could just go ahead and put Cypher up here as the best card and best legend in the set, and probably I think the best card in the set, to be quite honest. Montleonis is the best limit break card when you get to resolve all of his text. It's so easy for him to say you win the game. And I think it's kind of creates this dynamic where Mono Fire is back specifically just to rush into this guy and try to end the game with reviving Hien and a Cyan or something. So I think it's cool. I'm not a big fan of Mono Fire just as an element combination. I do think that it sucks a little bit that this exact deck loses to the same thing that one of the other best aggro decks in the game, the best aggro deck in the game loses to. And for that reason, I think that Montleonis is probably not the best card in the game. I don't know if this is a deck I would take to a tournament personally, but I wouldn't fault anybody that did. I do think that Samurais and Mono and Fire are good stuff. And I think you could do creative stuff even with the class Moogle to play a Fire Ice list, right? Or you could play Angeal to cheat in Pod Cloud or something like that. There's a lot of interesting things you can do with this card. And then lastly, I mentioned it in the set review, but Cypher and the entire Lightning FF8 package is just absurd. This card is undercosted. It mills you 2, which is card advantage in the deck. Feeds into your game plan. It gets back a forward when it does so. And then it's unconditional break on a really easy condition to meet. I've been Mist Dragon, and then the very next turn ended with 10 cards in break zone, so for a live Cypher again. And without really even going too hard out of my way to do so. No Don Corneo or anything like that, to turn it back on. He's just absurd. I think the entire package just... I cannot believe that Raijin gives all 3 of them haste still. That just is mind-blowing to me that they thought they could print a wolf/Narcomoeba that gave 3 forwards the ability to attack the turn they enter with even bigger upsides. He gets big, too. I've had it before where I have all 3 of them on the field. My opponent has Heka, and it doesn't matter because they're all 9Ks at that point. So this card is absurd. I'm very happy that I pulled a lot of him because I think that he is going to be expensive, if nothing else, because Lightning... If you ever look at the prices of Legends from the last couple sets, the Lightning ones are all expensive and the others are not. NA just plays Lightning cards like no one's business. So, yeah, these are kind of my feelings on the Legends, my little bit of a vibe check, if you will. Obviously, these aren't all the cards in the set. These aren't all the good cards in the set. These aren't all the important ones, but Figured it'd be kind of a fun way to talk about some Final Fantasy for a little bit. It's been a little while since you've heard my voice talking about it. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.